m'appelle Greta Thunberg et merci pour l'invitation. Thank you all for coming here, by the way. I have some good news and some bad news regarding the climate emergency. I will start with the good news. The world, as a small number of people have been saying lately, will not end in 11 years. The bad news, however, is that around the year 2030, if we continue with business as usual, we will likely be in a position where we may pass a number of tipping points, and then we might no longer be able to undo the irreversible climate breakdown. A lot of people, a lot of politicians, business leaders, journalists say they don't agree with what we're saying. They say we children are exaggerating, that we are alarmists. To answer this, I would like to refer to page 108, chapter 2 in the latest IPCC report. There you will find all our opinions summarized, because there you find our remaining carbon dioxide budget. Right there, it says that if we are to have a 67% chance of limiting the global temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees, we had, on January 1st, 2018, 420 gigatons of carbon dioxide left in our CO2 budget. And of course, that number is much lower today. We emit about 42 gigatons of CO2 every year. At current emissions levels, that remaining budget is gone within roughly 8.5 years. These numbers are as real as it gets. Though a great number of scientists suggest that they are too generous, these are the ones that have been accepted by all nations through the IPCC. And not once, not one single time have I heard any politician, journalist or business leader even mention these numbers. It is almost like you don't even know they exist. As if you haven't even read the latest IPCC report on which the future of our civilization is depending. Or maybe you are simply not mature enough to tell it like it is. Because even that burden you leave to us children. We become the bad guys who have to tell people these uncomfortable things because no one else wants to or dares to. And just for quoting and acting on these numbers, these scientific facts, we receive unimaginable amounts of hate and threats. We are being mocked and lied about by elected officials, members of parliaments, business leaders, journalists. What I really would like to ask all of those who question our so-called opinions or think that we are extreme, do you have a different budget for at least a reasonable chance of staying below the 1.5 degrees of warming limit? Is there another intergovernmental panel on climate change? Is there a secret Paris Agreement that we don't know about? One, does that not include the aspect of equity? Because these are the numbers that count. This is the current best available science. You can't simply make up your own facts just because you don't like what you hear. There is no middle ground when it comes to the climate and ecological emergency. Of course, you could argue that we should go for a more risky pathway, such as the alternative of 580 gigatons of CO2 from January 1st, 2018, which gives us a 50-50% chance of limiting the global temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees. That amount of carbon dioxide will run out in about 12 years of current business as usual. But why should we do that? Why should we accept taking that risk, leaving the future living conditions for humankind to a 50-50 flip of a coin? 420 gigatons left of CO2 to emit. And now that number is down to less than 360 gigatons. And please note that these figures are global and therefore do not say anything about the aspect of equity clearly stated throughout the Paris Agreement, which is absolutely necessary to make it work on a global scale. That means that richer countries need to get down to zero emissions faster, so that people in poorer parts of the world can heighten their standard of living by building some of the infrastructure that we have already built, such as roads, hospitals, electricity, schools, and providing clean drinking water. And because you have ignored these facts, because you and pretty much all of the media to this very minute keep ignoring them, people do not know what is going on. If you respect the science, if you understand the science, then this is it. 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit on January 1st to have a 67% chance of staying below a 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise, according to the IPCC. In the Paris Agreement, we have only signed up for staying below 1.5 to 2 degrees of temperature rise. And that of course gives us a bigger remaining carbon dioxide budget. But the latest IPCC report shows that aiming instead for below 1.5 degrees would significantly reduce the climate impacts. And that would most certainly save countless of human lives. This is what it's all about. This is all that we are saying. But I will also tell you this. You cannot solve a crisis without treating it as a crisis, without seeing the full picture. You cannot leave the responsibility to individuals, politicians, the market, or other parts of the world to take. This has to include everything and everyone. Once you realize how painfully small the size of our remaining carbon dioxide budget is, once you realize how fast it is disappearing, once you realize that basically nothing is being done about it, and once you realize that almost no one is even aware of the fact that carbon dioxide budget even exists, then tell me, what exactly do you do? And how do we do it without sounding alarmist? That is the question we must ask ourselves and the people in power. The science is clear, and all we children are doing is communicating and acting on that united science. Now political leaders in some countries are starting to talk. They are starting to declare climate emergencies and announcing dates for so-called climate neutrality. And declaring a climate emergency is good, but only setting up these vague, distant dates and saying things which give the impression of that things are being done and that action is on the way will most likely do more harm than good. Because the changes required are still nowhere in sight. Not in France, not in the EU, nowhere. And I believe that the biggest danger is not our inaction. The real danger is when companies and politicians are making it look like real action is happening, when in fact almost nothing is being done, apart from clever accounting and creative PR. climate and ecological emergency is right here, right now. But it has only just begun. It will get worse. 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit on January 1st, 2018 to have a 67% chance of staying below a 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise. And now that figure is already down to less than 360 gigatons. At current emissions levels, that remaining budget is gone within roughly 8.5 years. In fact, since I started this speech, the world has emitted about 800,000 tons of carbon dioxide. And if anyone still has excuses not to listen, not to act, not to care, I ask you once again, is there another intergovernmental panel on climate change? Is there a secret Paris Agreement that we don't know about? One that does not include the aspect of equity? Do you have a different budget for at least a reasonable chance of staying below 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise? Some people have chosen not to come here today. Some people have chosen not to listen to us. And that is fine. We are, after all, just children. You don't have to listen to us. But you do have to listen to the united science, the scientists. And that is all we ask. Just unite behind the science. Merci.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Now I would like to invite to stage to take the lecture to Mrs. Greta Thunberg.
A year and a half ago, I didn't speak to anyone unless I really had to. But then I found a reason to speak. Since then, I've given many speeches and learned that when you talk in public, you should start with something personal or emotional to get everyone's attention. Say things like, our house is on fire, I want you to panic, or how dare you. But today I will not do that. Because then those phrases are all that people focus on. They don't remember the facts, the very reason why I say those things in the first place. We no longer have time to leave out the science. Without seeing the full picture, we will not solve this crisis. Finding holistic solutions is what the COP should be all about. But instead, it seems to have turned into some kind of opportunity for countries to negotiate loopholes and to avoid raising their ambition. To stay below 1.5 degrees, we need to keep the carbon in the ground. Only setting up distant dates and saying things which give the impression of that action is underway will most likely do more harm than good, because the changes required are still nowhere in sight. The politics needed does not exist today, despite what you might hear from world leaders. And I still believe that the biggest danger is not inaction. The real danger is when politicians and CEOs are making it look like real action is happening when, in fact, almost nothing is being done apart from clever accounting and creative PR. There is no sense of urgency whatsoever. Our leaders are not behaving as if we were in an emergency. In an emergency, you change your behavior. If there's a child standing in the middle of the road and cars are coming at full speed, you don't look away because it's too uncomfortable. you immediately run out and rescue that child. And without that sense of urgency, how can we, the people, understand that we are facing a real crisis? And if the people are not fully aware of what is going on, then they will not put pressure on the people in power to act. And why is it so important to stay below 1.5 degrees? Because even at 1 degree, people are dying from the climate crisis. Because that is what the United Science calls for, to avoid destabilizing the climate, so that we have the best possible chance to avoid setting off irreversible chain reactions, such as melting glaciers, polar ice, and thawing Arctic permafrost. Every fraction of a degree matters. So there it is again. This is my message. This is what I want you to focus on. So please tell me, how do you react to these numbers without feeling at least some level of panic? How do you respond to the fact that basically nothing is being done about this without feeling the slightest bit of anger? And how do you communicate this without sounding alarmist? I would really like to know. We do not have to wait. We can start the change right now. We, the people. Thank you.
My name is Greta Thunberg. I am 15 years old and I'm from Sweden. I speak on behalf of climate justice now. Many people say that Sweden is just a small country and it doesn't matter what we do. But I've learned that you are never too small to make a difference. And if a few children can get headlines all over the world just by not going to school, then imagine what we could all do together if we really wanted to. But to do that, we have to speak clearly, no matter how uncomfortable that may be. You only speak of green, eternal economic growth because you are too scared of being unpopular. You only talk about moving forward with the same bad ideas that got us into this mess, even when the only sensible thing to do is pull the emergency brake. You are not mature enough to tell it like it is. Even that burden you leave to us children. But I don't care about being popular. I care about climate justice and a living planet. Our civilization is being sacrificed for the opportunity for a very small number of people to continue making enormous amounts of money. Our biosphere is being sacrificed so that rich people in countries like mine can live in luxury. It is the sufferings of the many which pay for the luxuries of the few. The year 2078, I will celebrate my 75th birthday. If I have children, maybe they will spend that day with me. Maybe they will ask me about you. Maybe they will ask why you didn't do anything while there still was time to act. You say you love your children above all else, and yet you are stealing their future in front of their very eyes. Until you start focusing on what needs to be done, rather than what is politically possible, there is no hope. We cannot solve a crisis without treating it as a crisis. We need to keep the fossil fuels in the ground, and we need to focus on equity. And if solutions within this system are so impossible to find, then maybe we should change the system itself. We have not come here to beg world leaders to care. You have ignored us in the past and you will ignore us again. We have run out of excuses and we are running out of time. We have come here to let you know that change is coming, whether you like it or not. The real power belongs to the people. Thank you.
I want to dedicate this prize to those protecting the Hambach forests and to the climate activists who fight to keep the fossil fuels in the ground everywhere. We live in a strange world, where the United Science tells us that we are about 11 years away from setting off an irreversible chain reaction, way beyond human control, that will probably be the end of our civilization as we know it. We live in a strange world, where children must sacrifice their education in order to protest against the destruction of their future. Where the people who have contributed the least to this crisis are the ones who are going to be affected the most. Where politicians say it's too expensive to save the world, while spending trillions of euros subsidizing fossil fuels. We live in a strange world, where no one dares to look beyond our current political systems, even though it's clear that the answers we seek will not be found within the politics of today. Where some people seem to be more concerned about the presence in school of some children than the future of humankind. Where everyone can choose their own reality and buy their own truth. Where our survival is depending on a small, rapidly disappearing carbon budget, and hardly anyone even knows it exists. Where we think we can buy and build our way out of a crisis that has been created by buying and building stuff. Where a football game or a film gala gets more media attention than the biggest crisis humanity has ever faced. Where celebrities, film and pop stars who have stood up against all injustices will not stand up for the environment and for climate justice, because that would inflict on their right to fly around the world, visiting their favorite restaurants, beaches, and yoga retreats. Avoiding catastrophic climate breakdown is to do the seemingly impossible. And yet that is what we have to do. But here's the truth. We can't do it without you in the audience here tonight. People see you celebrities as gods. You influence billions of people. We need you. You can use your voice to raise awareness about this global crisis.
You can help turn individuals into movements. You can help us wake up the leaders and let them know that our house is on fire. We live in a strange world, but it's the world that my generation has been handed. It's the only world we've got. We are now standing at a crossroads in history. We are failing, but we have not yet failed. There is still time to fix this. It's up to us. Thank you.
Répète, Martin. T'as pas quoi? On n'a plus l'audio sur la piste 2 là, que tu nous donnes.
Bonjour Montréal. Je suis très heureuse d'être ici, au Canada, au Québec. Merci beaucoup. So, at least 500,000 here today. You should be very proud of yourselves, and because this we have done together, and I cannot thank you enough for being here. So, around the world today, millions of people are marching right now, and it's just incredible to be united in such a way for a common cause, and it just feels great, doesn't it? But it feels great to be in Canada. It's a bit like coming home. I mean, you are very similar to Sweden, where I'm from. You have moose and we have moose. You have cold winters and lots of snow and pine trees. We have cold winters and lots of snow and pine trees. You have the caribou, we have the reindeer. You play ice hockey, we play ice hockey. You have maple syrup and we have, well, forget about that one. You are a nation that is eligibly a climate leader. And Sweden is also a nation that is eligibly a climate leader. And in both cases, it means absolutely nothing. still nowhere in sight. So we are basically the same. Last week, well over 4 million people in over 170 countries striked for the climate. We march for a living planet and a safe future for everyone. We spoke the science and demanded that the people in power would listen to and act on the science, but our political leaders didn't listen. This week, world leaders all around the world, from all around the world, gathered in New York for the UN Climate Action Summit. They disappointed us once again with their empty words and insufficient plans. We told them to unite behind the science, but they didn't listen. So today, we are millions around the world, striking and marching again, and we will keep on doing it until they listen. If the people in power won't take their responsibility, then we will. It should not be up to us, but somebody needs to do it. They say we shouldn't worry, that we should look forward to a bright future. But they forget that if they would have done their job, we wouldn't need to worry. If they had started acting in time, then this crisis wouldn't be the crisis it is today. And we promise, once they start taking the responsibility and do their job, we will stop worrying and go back to school, go back to work. And once again, we are not communicating our opinions or political views. The climate and ecological crisis is beyond party politics. We are communicating the current best available science. To some people, particularly in those who in many ways have caused this crisis, that science is too uncomfortable to address. But we will have to live with the consequences, and indeed those who are living with the climate and ecological crisis already, we don't have a choice. To stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius and give us a chance to avoid the risk of setting off irreversible chain reactions beyond human control, to do that we must speak clearly and tell it like it is, and tell the truth. In the IPCC's SR 1.5 report that came out last year, it says on page 108 in chapter 2 that to have a 67% chance of staying below a 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise, the best odds given by the IPCC, the the world had 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit back on January 1st, 2018. And today, that figure is already down to less than 350 gigatons. With today's emissions levels, that remaining CO2 budget will be entirely gone within less than 8.5 years. And please note that these calculations do not include already locked-in warming hidden by toxic air pollution, non-linear tipping points, most feedback loops, or the aspect of equity, climate justice. They are also relying on my generation, your generation, sucking hundreds of billions of tons of CO2 out of the air with technologies that barely exist. And not one single time have I heard any politician, journalist, or business leaders even mention these numbers. They say, let children be children. We agree. Let us be children. Do your part. Communicate these kinds of numbers instead of leaving that responsibility to us. Then we can go back to being children. And we are not in school today. You are not at work today. Because this is an emergency. And we will not be bystanders. Some would say we are wasting lesson time. We say we are changing the world. So that when we are older, we will be able to look our children in the eyes and say that we did
Our house is on fire. I am here to say our house is on fire. According to the IPCC, we are less than 12 years away from not being able to undo our mistakes. In that time, unprecedented changes in all aspects of society needs to have taken place, including a reduction of our CO2 emissions by at least 50%. And please note that those numbers do not include the aspect of equity, which is absolutely necessary to make the Paris Agreement work on a global scale. Nor does it include tipping points or feedback loops like the extreme powerful methane gas being released from the thawing Arctic permafrost. At places like Davos, people like to tell success stories, but their financial success has come with an unthinkable price tag. And on climate change, we have to acknowledge that we have failed. All political movements in their present form have done so. And the media has failed to create broad public awareness. But Homo sapiens have not yet failed. Yes, we are failing, but there is still time to turn everything around. We can still fix this. We still have everything in our own hands. But unless we recognize the overall failures of our current systems, we most probably don't stand a chance. We are facing a disaster of unspoken sufferings for enormous amounts of people. And now is not the time for speaking politely or focusing on what we can or cannot say. Now is the time to speak clearly. Solving the climate crisis is the greatest and most complex challenge that Homo sapiens have ever faced. The main solution, however, is so simple that even a small child can understand it. We have to stop the emissions of greenhouse gases. And either we do that or we don't. You say nothing in life is black or white, but that is a lie, a very dangerous lie. Either we prevent a 1.5 degree of warming or we don't. Either we avoid setting off that irreversible chain reaction beyond human control or we don't. Either we choose to go on as a civilization or we don't. That is as black or white as it gets. There are no grey areas when it comes to survival. Now we all have a choice. We can create a transformational action that will safeguard the future living conditions for humankind. Or we can continue with our business as usual and fail. That is up to you and me. Some say that we should not engage in activism. Instead, we should leave everything to our politicians and just vote for change instead. But what do we do when there is no political will? What do we do when the politics needed are nowhere in sight? Here in Davos, just like everywhere else, everyone is talking about money. It seems that money and growth are our only main concerns. And since the climate crisis is a crisis that has never once been treated as a crisis, people are simply not aware of the full consequences of our everyday life. People are not aware that there is such a thing as a carbon budget, and just how incredibly small that remaining carbon budget is. And that needs to change today. No other current challenge can match the importance of establishing a wide public awareness and understanding of our rapidly disappearing carbon budget that should and must become our new global currency and the very heart of future and present economics. We are now at a time in history where everyone with any insight of the climate crisis that threatens our civilization and the entire biosphere must speak out in clear language, no matter how uncomfortable and unprofitable that may be.
We must change almost everything in our current societies. The bigger your carbon footprint is, the bigger your moral duty. The bigger your platform, the bigger your responsibility. Adults keep saying we owe it to the young people to give them hope. But I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. And then I want you to act. I want you to act as if you would in a crisis. I want you to act as if the house was on fire. Because it is.
Thank you very much indeed to the presidents sitting here. It's now my great pleasure. Could I please ask everyone to sit down again? I know there's a great deal of excitement. We have some very important people here, including Greta Thunberg, the one and only Greta. Greta? Greta, may I ask you now please to come to the lectern and give us your insights. Please could you help Greta get to the lectern, please? The floor is yours, Greta.
My name is Greta Thunberg. I'm a climate activist from Sweden. And today in this room there's also, if you can come up, Anuna, Adelaide, Kira, Gilles, I don't know how to pronounce it, Dries, Toon and Louisa. Tens of thousands of children are school striking for the climate on the streets of Brussels. Hundreds of thousands are doing the same all over the world. We are school striking because we have done our homework. And some of us are here today. People always tell us that they are so hopeful. They are hopeful that the young people are going to save the world. But we are not. There is simply not enough time to wait for us to grow up and become the ones in charge. Because by the year 2020, we need to have bended the emissions curve steep downwards. That is next year. We know that most politicians don't want to talk to us. Good. We don't want to talk to them either. We want them to talk to the scientists instead. Listen to them. Because we are just repeating what they are saying and have been saying for decades. We want you to follow the Paris Agreement and the IPCC report. We don't have any other manifests or demands. Just unite behind the science. That is our demand. When many politicians talk about the school strike for the climate, they talk about almost anything except from the climate crisis. Many people are trying to make the school strikes a question of whether we are promoting truancy or whether we should go back to school or not. They make up all sorts of conspiracies and call us puppets who cannot think for ourselves. They are desperately trying to remove the focus from the climate crisis and change the subject. They don't want to talk about it because they know they cannot win this fight. Because they know they haven't done their homework, but we have. Once you have done your homework, you realize that we need new politics. We need new economics where everything is based on our rapidly declining and extremely limited remaining carbon budget. But that is not enough. We need a whole new way of thinking. The political system that you have created is all about competition. You cheat when you can because all that matters is to win, to get power. That must come to an end. We must stop competing with each other. We need to cooperate and work together and to share the resources of the planet in a fair way. We need to start living within the planetary boundaries, focus on equity, and take a few steps back for the sake of all living species. We need to protect the biosphere, the air, the oceans, the soil, the forests. This may sound very naive, but if you have done your homework, then you know that we don't have any other choice. We need to focus every inch of our being on climate change. Because if we fail to do so, then all our achievements and progress have been for nothing. And all that will remain of our political leaders' legacy will be the greatest failure of human history. And they will be remembered as the greatest villains of all time because they have chosen not to listen and not to act. But this does not have to be. There is still time. According to the IPCC report, we are about 11 years away from being in a position where we set off an irreversible chain reaction beyond human control. To avoid that, unprecedented changes in all aspects of society need to have taken place within this coming decade, including a reduction of our CO2 emissions by at least 50% by the year 2030. And please note that those numbers do not include the aspect of equity, which is absolutely necessary to make the Paris Agreement work on a global scale. Nor do they include tipping points or feedback loops, like the extremely powerful methane gas released from the thawing Arctic permafrost. They do, however, include negative emission techniques on a huge planetary scale that is yet to be invented, and that many scientists fear will never be ready in time, and will anyway be impossible to deliver at the scale assumed. We have been told that the EU intends to improve its emission reduction target. In the new target, the EU is proposing to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions to 45% below 1990's level by 2030. Some people say that is good or that is ambitious. But this new target is still not enough to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. This target is not sufficient to protect the future for children growing up today. If the EU is to make its fair contribution to staying within the carbon budget for the 2-degree limit, then it needs a minimum of 80% reduction by 2030. And that includes aviation and shipping. So around twice as ambitious as the current proposal. The actions required are beyond manifestos or any party politics. Once again, they sweep their mess under the carpet for our generation to clean up and solve. Some people say that we are fighting for our future, but that is not true. We are not fighting for our future, we are fighting for everyone's future. And if you think that we should be in school instead, then we suggest that you take our place in the streets, striking from your work. Or better yet, join us so we can speed up the process. And I'm sorry, but saying everything will be alright while continue doing nothing at all is just not hopeful to us. In fact, it's the opposite of hope. And And yet this is exactly what you keep doing. You can't just sit around waiting for hope to come. Then you're acting like spoiled, irresponsible children. You don't seem to understand that hope is something you have to earn. And if you still say that we are wasting valuable lesson time, then let me remind you that our political leaders have wasted decades through denial and inaction. And since our time is running out, we have decided to take action. We have started to clean up your mess, and we will not stop until we are done. Thank you. This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. And yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? For more than 30 years, the science has been crystal clear. How dare you continue to look away and come here saying that you're doing enough when the politics and solutions needed are still nowhere in sight? You say you hear us and that you understand the urgency. But no matter how sad and angry I am, I do not want to believe that. Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil, and that I refuse to believe. The popular idea of cutting our emissions in half in 10 years only gives us a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees and the risk of setting off irreversible chain reactions beyond human control. 50% may be acceptable to you, but those numbers do not include tipping points, most feedback loops, additional warming hidden by toxic air pollution, or the aspects of equity and climate justice. They also rely on my generation sucking hundreds of billions of tons of your CO2 out of the air with technologies that barely exist. So a 50% risk is simply not acceptable to us, we who have to live with the consequences. To have a 67% chance of staying below a 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise, the best odds given by the IPCC, the world had 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit back on January 1st, 2018. Today that figure is already down to less than 350 gigatons. How dare you pretend that this can be solved with just business as usual and some technical solutions? With today's emissions levels, that remaining CO2 budget will be entirely gone within less than 8.5 years. There will not be any solutions or plans presented in line with these figures here today, because these numbers are too uncomfortable and you are still not mature enough to tell it like it is. You are failing us, but the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you. We will not let you get away with this. Right here, right now, is where we draw the line. The world is waking up, and change is coming whether you like it or not. Thank you.